welcome everyone to the February proposal review call. These calls, as a reminder, are an opportunity to give proposal authors to present and discuss the active proposals that are going through the cycle this month. This month, we have one proposal, which we will get to in a bit. But before we do, just a few quick announcements. Oops. If I can, there we go. Yep, so just as always, the monthly governance committee update has been posted. I'll share it in the chat here in a second. The main announcement in this post, and I also wanted to highlight it here just in case folks had missed it, we made a few changes to the Discord, the Radworks Discord, just to try to make it a little bit more of a inviting and productive place. And one of those changes I wanted to highlight, because it specifically relates to governance, is that the governance announcements, which used to be in the governance updates channel, will now just all be sent in the general announcements channel. So just if you're looking for governance updates, you can keep an eye out there. But I just wanted to highlight that in case anybody had missed it. So recent proposals, we had the grants org proposal go through the January cycle, and it did pass. So the grants org is officially funded through 2024. It was a really interesting discussion and a really interesting process to get that proposal passed. So if you haven't read through the discussion yet, or the proposal at all, I highly recommend it, because I think it turned out, or it ended up in a really good place. February active proposal, so we'll get to this in a second, but there's a proposal up right now to start a Radicle seed network org, which LA, the proposal author, will speak about primarily today. And actually, before we dive into that, though, I did want to mention it's written in this governance committee update as well. But just in terms of upcoming proposals, one that we'll see kind of come on the forum probably within the next week or so is the kind of initial draft of the executable proposal to upgrade the governance contracts. If you folks remember, in late last year, there was a social proposal that went through governance and was approved by the community to gain consensus around upgrading our existing governance contracts. We have been doing this with the help of the Scope Lift team, who has been preparing all of the tests and running all the tests and experiments to make sure that the upgrade will be ready to go. We'll be upgrading from Compound Alpha, which is kind of the industry standard at the time of when Radworks or the Radicle DAO launched, but now it's kind of it's been succeeded by some other new and improved contracts, and that the one that we will be upgrading to is the Open Zeppelin Governor contract, or that is proposed to be upgraded to is Open Zeppelin Governor contract. So keep an eye out for that proposal. We're not planning to rush it through governance. Like we'll post it probably like mid-February, but we'll leave it on the forum, just open for discussion for a while. And if it makes sense, if we get a sense from the community that they would be ready to vote on it in the March cycle, we might vote on it in the March cycle. If there's like kind of like deeper discussion that needs to be had, it might be pushed back to April. This is obviously a very important and critical upgrade, and has some like risk tied to it too. So we just want to make sure that everybody is on board and ready for the upgrade as well. So just wanted to call that out so people are also aware of when they see it pop up on the forum. Okay, so I will stop talking now, and I will hand it over to LA.
Cool. Thank you, Shelby. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Cool. Great. So we'll say a few words about the proposal, maybe a little bit of history about, how it came to be, and then, some interesting or divisive facts about it, and then we can go into questions. There's already a lot of questions on the forum, so yeah, we can move to that. But yeah, let me say first, thank you to everyone that has contributed to this. This is a conversation that has started at the beginning of December and has received a lot of different contributions. Actually, as the proposal author, I have to say that this is probably the proposal process that I enjoyed the most, because eventually, like, after having gone through like so many, like, layers of feedback, at the end when I had to craft the proposal, I literally reused other people's arguments and formulations that I thought that really resonated. So like I would love to see more of that in our ecosystem. I feel that this is something that I'm personally very excited for this style of proposal creation somehow. Going into more specific, so how did this idea start? The interesting story that I don't think I've actually written anywhere, but I think I mentioned that to a few of you. When in November, I was speaking with the Radicle org, and I realized that actually there's indeed a high likelihood of actually hitting our deadlines and shipping Radicle 1.0 in Q1, which is what is currently planned for. I had at the time started thinking about, okay, like great, Radicle 1.0 will be in the market, and that's so amazing. And then Drips is already in the market, and it's really like looking to actually, it's kind of in a growth phase, right? Like we're really looking to grow that ecosystem. So I immediately, I had started to think about new challenges for the DAO, and there are a few things that motivate that maybe I can, we can go in more detail later. But I started thinking about other things that we could be doing that could be enhancing this ecosystem strategically, that can be additive, right? And that they don't introduce new dependencies with regards to if there's something that will make Radicle succeed or fail, that would make sense for that to be captured there, and the same for Drifts. But I was trying to think about things that we could do on top of the existing technology that we have. And the original idea that I had actually was slightly different. So I've been following generally all the decentralized storage ecosystems. And one of the interesting propositions for me over the years has been Arweave. I've been actually looking into that ecosystem, quite a lot. And the main offer, the main value proposition that they have is actually permanent storage. And specifically when it comes to open source software, there is this proposition is actually quite interesting. Like for the ones of you that are familiar with the program that GitHub has, that the for interesting open source projects, actually they claim that they have this whole process where they will store all of that code for thousands of years. Basically, there's like quite a lot to it. But generally, this idea of permanent storage for valuable code base is something that I think is quite interesting. So I started thinking about that. Hey, my original thought process was that could we start thinking about potentially having some form of network built on top of the peer-to-peer Radicle network that will actually, focus on permanent storage. Will provide an additional service if you're interested in, storing your files forever type of thing. Then we have a service for you, right? And that's where I started. And I started actually speaking with a few people, like me and Cloud here, as we still we exchange a lot of ideas around those things. And I was like, oh, what do you think about that? Is this something that you think is possible? And he's like, you know what, actually, it's a cool idea, but if you really look at this Arweave ecosystem, you will see that both with the Arweave ecosystem and with the Filecoin and IPFS ecosystem, it's the retrieval side of things that has become centralized. And I started looking deeper in that, and indeed, it's all the gateways. It's this is the new point of centralization. Even if you have a proof-based system for storage, for decentralized storage, which Arweave does have, still retrieval is going through very few actors. So that has become the new point of centralization and the new point of concern if you care about censorship and censorship resistance. So this idea about permanent storage got me researching and thinking about retrieval and how to think about retrieval markets for Radicle. And as I started thinking about this, it was at the beginning it was instinctive. I was like, hey, this is interesting. Like, if these networks actually grow, there is a decent chance that we will face some of the similar concerns, some of the similar issues that the existing ecosystems are facing, like IPFS, for instance. And then I started noticing that the IPFS and Protocol Labs actually have started investing in a decentralized retrieval service, the equivalent of, the equivalent of our own seed nodes that they call Saturn, that they already, testing, like they're claiming that they have a few thousand nodes live. And that was really when I started going a lot deeper, Arweave has a similar offering called R.io. And this is where I started sharing more things with the community. And of course, beyond okay, this is like an interesting idea, and yes, this is an interesting problem that, some Radicle users might face. I started thinking a lot about, okay, is there also a value proposition here to the market? Is there a market for something like this here? And if yes, how does that look like, right? And this is where I really feel that through the conversation and the call we had with a lot of community contributors, I actually had this realization that if you think about, the Radicle network and retrieval on the Radicle network, the way it is engineered, of course, you have the gossip-based peer-to-peer network, which actually is really great, if it works as expected, fingers crossed, as a design. It's when it comes to censorship resistance, that's actually really, really great, especially, for hobbyists and smaller users. But what I started realizing is that when it comes to app developers, and it happens that with Drips, we are app developers and we're actually using IPFS, it feels like there is a distinct market audience there that actually is interested in decentralized storage or some form of decentralized storage. And is looking for different things. And one of the things, for instance, that we're very keen on and very interested with Drips is, we do not want to store sensible user data in a database, right? User owned, data sets, basically sovereignty around data is something that is important to us, right? Someone would say, well, maybe censorship resistance is less important with Drips because of what we do, debatable. But actually, data sovereignty for our users is extremely important for us, right? So I started realizing that actually, there might be a target segment in there, which is app developers that are looking for something different. And then through that process, of course, and with a lot of contributions, actually, both from Cloudhead and from Yorgos and Vangelis that I can see on the call, I started to realize that there is this, there are almost two market segments. The one market segment, which I think Yorgos actually describes really well as, try before you buy or try before you commit, are developers that are actually looking for convenience, right? They don't want to run their own node. They want to actually use an existing service and basically get familiar with that ecosystem. And usually third-party services do that well. This is not great for censorship, and actually there are a lot of incidents recently where governments will go to this gateway providers and say, hey, censor this specific front end, for instance. And I can talk about that if this is interesting, but actually does really work well for convenience. And this is a very common pattern, you see Piñata on the IPFS ecosystem. And then, you there was another one for Scuttle, but it's extremely common by now. This is a very proven pattern. And, I think that this is an interesting business opportunity there. I think this is fairly proven. It's fairly trivial as a service. Is actually not that complex, and add something to the Radicle ecosystem. Particularly, I'm more interested in all the censorship resistant stuff. So while convenience is cool and potentially having a team that is working on a third party seed node effectively for both hosting and retrieving content is cool. I'm more and more interested in censorship resistance, and specifically within crypto networks, there is a distinct market segment of users that care about, for instance, decentralizing front ends, right? Like having the front end of your app actually be also censorship resistant, the same way that your smart contracts are censorship resistant by basically being being on the blockchain. So that's where I actually started thinking that, okay, like clear, there's a need here for centralized third-party service, easy for convenience, but I feel that there's also like something, slightly different, which is more leaning towards, decentralization, censorship resistance, and a blend of performance. Because, for instance, when we're talking about front ends, if the front end like takes forever to load, that's actually not acceptable here as a solution, right? So it's a blend of censorship resistance and performance. And I started looking into that. And then, of course, like Saturn is trying to do that for the IPFS ecosystem. I mentioned a few other projects that actually, like Flick is another one that has been on our ecosystem as well, right? So it seems that there is stuff happening there. And, like many of those are like pretty much all of them, like, none of them is like in full production mode. So they all still in some really heavy development, but the idea is appealing. I understand why they're going after that market. The big question for me there is like, can you satisfy the latency requirements that something like that would require? And this decentralized service comes with a lot of uncertainty. So through that process, I realized that actually I think that there's an opportunity to create a team that will try to tackle both of those things. And again, like, for the less technical audience, like this is additive to the gossip radicals, gossip network is for censorship resistance is great, right? Like, it's very decentralized, assuming that this network scales. But this is slightly different, right? This is for slightly different needs that I outlined more specifically in the proposal. So I realized that there's an opportunity to actually create something additive to Radicle. Radicle can succeed without this thing. And I think this is very, very important. The Radicle organization doesn't depend on this. But if this is also around, I feel that this is a very nice two very nice additional services, in my opinion, if both of those things check out. So that's what I realized, and I was like, okay, great. Like, I want to push this forward. Like, I think that, I like doing this type of stuff. I like, bringing like new ideas and, going and finding the right team and like basically like, like creating a strategy, like setting goals, like go through that process. I very much enjoyed. So I decided to actually bring forward the proposal, which I did. I want to say upfront that like a lot of the conversation on the forum has gone on this whole org versus team versus grant, which again, I personally do not have a strong preference. I outlined some specific reasons about what I'm trying to satisfy. For instance, I consider this a long-term project. For instance, if we go down to an option of a short-term grant, it will make my life harder to go hire, like, high caliber of engineers. Like that is like not so easy, for instance, right? So for instance, I outlined a bunch of different reasons, and we should totally discuss this, although I would also love to discuss the more like, strategic content beyond the operational side as well. But yeah, like I put forward a proposal for a new team or grant, however you want to call this, that will actually build two services, one centralized, which is, based on my assessment and the conversation I had with people that I expect is a fairly trivial undertaking, and then one that is actually very challenging, mostly performance-wise, not economics-wise. Which is the decentralized service. But I really thought that, hey, it makes sense to package those things together. The one is a low risk, the other one is a high risk. The infrastructure is very similar, like we're talking about actually like, operating seed nodes. So I thought that the packaging, both when it comes to technology and when it comes to risk, made sense. So I brought this proposal forward, and basically like I'm asking for, don't remember this on top of my head, something around 540K, all paid in RAD. And yeah, majority of this will go to contributors. The idea as well is for me to actually like, build the team and, get out, slowly get out. I still like to find a lot of this stuff very, very interesting, but I have a lot of work right now with trips and some work with Radicle. So I want to bootstrap the team, stay around as much as needed, and then after that contribute, the same way I contribute to Radicle at the moment, through like research, reviews, like, and conversations basically. Yeah, that's pretty much that. And then yeah, I'll maybe stop here. How much time did I take? I took actually like 20 minutes. Okay, interesting. So yeah, let's like definitely leave at least 40 minutes for questions. Yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing. And for giving the context around it as well. I dropped the link to the original like discussion post that came before, that led up to this proposal. And there's a lot of really great discussion and questions and things that happen there. So if you haven't looked at it, I recommend doing so for more context around this proposal itself. Anybody have any questions for LA?
And
Yes,
Selby,
Vincent?
one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Selby, one thing. Like there are already a lot of questions on the forum that are replied already. If there are follow-ups there, let's do this. But let's also try to cover it. Like, if my answer there covered you, let's like basically try to cover new questions or like follow-ups to the answers that provided.
Yeah, absolutely. Benton,
Cool.
do you wanna go?
Sure. Sorry, I haven't read through the whole proposal, so maybe you've answered this in the proposal itself, but do you already have a team in mind? And second follow-up question to that is, do you think you'll find people who are interested in getting paid in RAD?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So do I have a team in mind? I have 3 individuals in mind that have that the likelihood of me closing them varies. so I have certain individuals and certain profiles in mind. And we can maybe talk a bit more about that. But I don't have I haven't progressed or anything like that, then I don't know if I will be able to close them. I think the one out of the 3, I feel that I will be able to close. The other 2, no. But I actually have accounted for I have budget, and I also have accounted for a little bit of for some budget as well, for potentially a proper search with an agency as well if it's needed. So I have done some thinking around that. That was your first question. With regards to the second question, with regards to RAD, I'm asking here for RAD because this is also something that I generally try to bring things that I want to see more of in the community. In the community. So I was like, hey, you know what? Actually, I think it's a cool idea to actually try to do that. I know that within the community, certain individuals are more focused on stablecoins and things like that. But we also have a lot of RAD in the treasury. RAD is a very liquid token at the moment. It's one of the things that have gone well. So we don't necessarily need to pay people in RAD. We can pay people in RAD if they want to, but of course, we can also convert some of that RAD, to USDC, and especially if that happens over the period of the next 11 months, that I don't think that this will have any significant price impact in the market given the small amount it is. So flexible, we can the setup that I'm going for can pay in crypto or in fiat.
Yeah, cool. Makes sense. Sweet. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Andrew.
Hey, yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Nice. Yeah, first I just want to say, yeah, thanks, Ellie, for bringing this really cool proposal. I think, I don't know, I love that, as the project grows and as Radworks grows and matures, you're still kind of bringing the energy of the kind of decentralized, crypto punk stuff that Vitalik is
appreciate it.
is calling for as well. And because it's hard as things grow, right? There's more pressure to not do the cool things. So anyways, I guess my question is, so I guess maybe similar to you, I have kind of a similar intuition whenever I see something like this in technology generally, where it's kind of like your intuition with Arweave of could it do, we have this need we need to solve with Radworks, we're going to build this generic tool, but could it be useful for other problems? And I guess you were sort of thinking about, could Radworks or could Radicle be used to serve Arweave data, but I guess with this, I would be curious whether you thought at all about whether this component could be used to serve other projects and could be more generic in the ecosystem. And I see a lot of benefits to that. I mean, to me, it seems like, having looked at P2P software a little bit through the years and worked on a few projects, this is like a general problem, right? Of like how to find trusted nodes in a decentralized way. I mean, presumably Signal has this problem at some level. Tor probably does. I mean, I think you've said that like Arweave and a bunch of the other file sharing ones do, right? So I think especially with Radworks' goal of kind of supporting internet freedom generally, and then also I think it would be nice, and we don't really know how fast, even, you know, assuming Radicle launch at 1.0 launches, you know, depending on the speed of user adoption, it could provide a much like larger audience, and then people who would be willing to support this project to stand on its own and continue to evolve over the long term. So yeah, I guess unless there's some reason not to, I think it would be really cool to try to develop it as a generalized component that could enable seed finding for any P2P project. But yeah, I guess just curious what you think about that, and if you see downsides to it or other considerations.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting thought. So first of all, to say that, like, you know, thank you for the good words at the beginning. Like, I don't know if I deserve them in this one, because if you look at the proposal, like, you know, it has the one service is, you know, centralized, and something that actually like, you know, my idealism was at first was like, hey, like, you know, do we actually really need that? Get like some other people to develop that. But I think it's actually like, you know, a nice stepping stone. The second service, which is the more, you know, decentralized, like basically like multiple nodes coordinating via like, you know, some form of token or some form of blockchain, is the thing that I'm personally like more excited about. And I think that this is the one that actually fits like you know, like our vision with Radicle a lot more. But you know, again, like over the years, I learned that like we got to be both pragmatic and, you know, like idealistic, and package those things together so the one kind of serves the other. So yeah, so now I don't know how much I deserve the credit for like, you know, keeping the ideals. I'm trying, but on the second part of your question, like I thought about, and actually like when I looked around for who's operating there, you will see that now, like for instance, there are a number of these providers that actually try to go cross ecosystem. And you know, the one that absolutely tries to do that is Flick, Flick.io, I think, or .xyz, one or the other. So they basically, like, their promise is that exactly what you described. We're going to be agnostic towards what peer-to-peer network you use. And there's another service that actually does that, while Saturn, for instance, is solely focused within IPFS. It's definitely interesting. I feel that just generally, again, like I would prefer to start small, like both like with our experiences with like, you know, with Radicle and with Drips, you realize how early many of those protocols are, and they come with their own, like, you know, particularities and, you know, like challenges. So I don't want to have to think at this point about how much like of these we will be stacking if we actually go beyond Radicle. And like in a more selfish way, like at this point, I'm actually more excited about like, you know, like also helping the Radicle stack mature and like, you know, bring another angle to that. So I'm more keen on that. I think it's more pragmatic to start with one, see how well we do. I also see the clear need there, right? Like no one actually is doing this today with something that Euros is doing, of course, right? So I feel like it makes a lot more sense to actually start there, and then who knows? But I feel that, yeah, I would both personally and I think like strategically, I think it's wiser to actually start only with Radicle and then go from there.
Cool. Maybe a quick follow-up question. Were you saying that Fleek does this generally for any P2P project?
Not in production. they
Okay.
working on it. But Flick, Flick is basically the way they market themselves, and they are on testnet right now, but it's closed from what I've seen. They launching with the saying Arweave support and IPFS support and Filecoin support. So they, by design, they will come out with a bunch of like, you know, like basically they will be like storage agnostic. They would provide a bunch of those nodes, I guess, in their network. But like, yeah, to be seen how that actually checks out.
Yeah, and I guess so. Then I guess my question becomes the flip side is what would I mean? Because intuitively, it seems like there'd be a lot of benefits to working with Fleek if they've done a lot of this research already and built the infrastructure in the network, and they're going to be doing it like massive scale. What about the idea of working with them to build an adapter for Radworks? It seems like we would leverage like a massive amount of engineering and scale
Yeah, like if
versus
any
like
of
starting
those,
from scratch.
yeah, totally. No, if any of those technologies were actually really developed, like I will tell you that, like, yes, definitely, like, let's actually do this because there's a clear, like, winner. But actually, like, like Saturn is the one that, from my assessment, is the one that has gone the furthest. Everything else actually still in a very, like, early, early stage. So, what they claim on their website versus what happens in reality, like, as like, we noticed multiple times with the crypto world, is two different things. So I prefer to stay conservative and, explore this, like, in-house until, like we say, that doesn't make sense. I also think that's a great, like, business opportunity, if you wish. There's a great opportunity for us to bring a service to the market that is, differentiated and focused and potentially a better experience.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool.
I think Finton had another question.
Yeah, a good segue from mentioning like getting into the Radicle ecosystem. What kind of overlaps do you see with working with and alongside Radicle, and would it be beneficial for like being more present in the Zulip rather than a new Discord?
Yeah, no, like the operational side is something that I really wanna like hear your take. Like the way I'm thinking about this myself is that, like, I don't think that we want to have any special privileges. This is what I'm saying also on the proposal. I think that is actually like a feature, not a bug, to have a separate team for that, because the Radicle peer-to-peer, like, needs to treat, like, node operators differently. Like, I'm fairly confident that if Radicle keeps on growing, there will probably be many of those, right? And I think the network will likely benefit from treating all of those equal. So I don't think that we need to have any special rights. And I actually like the idea that the Radicle core protocol team is not like the team that's also, like, creating a service on top of that. So that's the first point. With regards to, like, the way we're thinking about the way we're thinking about contributing to Radicle, it's like, I think Yorgos, like, puts nicely that, like, this is a team that will, like, succeed a lot, like, based on, ease of use for, like, like ease of use, like, support, documentation, like, the the DevOps side of things as well, like, things like that, which are very different to, like, what I feel that, the core protocol is focused at the moment. In the ideal scenario, in the ideal scenario, like, we also contribute some patches to the protocol, right? Like, that would be the dream, right? That, like, we have active contributors that, okay, like, operating nodes, great, they're getting good at this. Well, they hopefully have some ideas as well of how to advance the protocol, but, like, even that is a nice to have. It's not a requirement, in my opinion. So I feel that this is really, like, as is today, very orthogonal to, what the protocol team is doing. But I still, you're right, like, maybe it's a good idea. Like, I'm sure that, like, the contributors will be active on Zulip. Should this be on Zulip? Maybe, but again, like, you see, like, if you think about our audience, maybe it makes more sense to be on Discord, actually, because, like, like, probably most of our audience will, like, be familiar there. But something to discover. I'm not sure, like, bet, like, pros and cons. Like, if you have strong opinions, please, like, drop them on the forum.
Cool. Yeah. Sweet.
Cool. Thank you.
Angie.
Hey there. Thanks, Ellie, for this. And I also, like, as I really liked you calling out, I will just say, this section where you say my thinking is, like, if you care about convenience, if you care about censorship resistance, like, I really liked the way you kind kind of articulated this section. So thank you for that. As you and this won't come as a surprise to you because I mentioned it online, and Shelby, I also wanted to know too, maybe the best way to just because I feel like people are less likely to maybe rewatch this video, how do we capture some of the new elements that were maybe discussed in ways that people can easily find them in the forum? And I'm happy to maybe even write up whatever is discussed here in response to my question. I can write it on the forum as well, if maybe that's helpful. In any case, my question is more about accountability around funds, because in your proposal,
Yep.
you do mention that you do intend to leave the project and hand it over to the new lead, which means that we would be voting today on transferring funds to a wallet where we are likely to see a change of responsibility to someone we don't know right now. So I'm a bit concerned about the accountability there, and would love to hear more about your ideas, because I mean, this is something we've been even thinking about accountability for all of our orgs, generally speaking. We've thought about, are there ways where we maybe have disbursements quarterly of funds or what have you? Are there ways for us to, how are you initially maybe speaking about that situation? And I'm happy to chime in with maybe some of the ideas that have come to mind for me.
Yeah, no, sounds great. And great question. Maybe thanks for the feedback on the formulation about the convenience versus performance. Again, just to say that this was co-developed, and I mean it. I actually brought an idea super early to the forum, which was the first time that I've done this. Generally, I try to package my ideas a bit better. And then we had the call where a few people, if you read the original post and you read this post, you will see actually the whole thinking. In the video call we had, I remember it was Andrew and Igor, and Yorgos, a few people were you know what, this doesn't make sense, but actually, convenience, it does make sense, and this makes sense. And you could actually really trace that. So again, just one more personal recommendation that I think we benefit by actually bringing ideas early to the forum. At least I personally benefit a lot in this one, and gave me a lot of clarity in what matters where, and is this a good idea? So one note on that. So with regards to your question about the management of funds, it's something that I also struggled I don't think it's unsolvable, but it will require us, to think this through a bit better, both in the scenarios if we go for an org or if we go for a grant, which, as I said, I don't deeply care about that. I have some practical questions around that. But let's, in the scenario that even if we go for a grant, probably there will be some form of entity. I don't think that I will feel comfortable without not having an entity for multiple reasons, right? So assuming that either if we go for a grant or if we go for an org, there will be an entity of those contributors somewhere. And then I still think that the Swiss association model that I'm proposing, which we now have experience with DRIPS, is actually very, very nice. And Angie, you're clearly the expert on that. So if you don't think that it's nice, this is a good time to tell me. But from my side, this has been nice. And just for context, again, this association, the way we have it in DRIPS is that the contributors that want to be members, they actually are equal members. And that is super nice because it allows for flexibility. What if one day, I leave the DRIPS project, the team can actually is ready to move on without me, right? So for instance, and for every other contributor. So I really like this idea for the association still. But of course, the difference between DRIPS and this organization is that DRIPS, the contributors have been around for a while, I founded the thing, right? So there is a lot of history that comes with the contributors, which here, it won't be the case. So outside of me, there will be, new contributors. And of course, the question is even if it's a grant or if it's an org, how do we trust them with all of those funds, especially if this is some form of multi-sig that reflects the association, which is how we have it on the DRIPS, right? So that is a problem. Like I'm again open to creative solutions. Like the creative solution that I was thinking about going for is that in Switzerland for associations you can have like multiple members. The members do not need to be contributors, right? Like you can actually have like any member. So what we could do is we potentially could have like, you know, some already proven contributors if they're open to it, like, you know, to be sitting at, you know, that association as equal members, and then, you know, be the majority at least for this year, or like, you know, until we basically say, okay, like, you know, this team is now trusted, and then navigate it this way. There are no tax consequences or anything like that, at least, you know, for most of the jurisdictions that we already looked at. So, but I would love to hear your opinion, though.
Yeah, I guess, well, one evaluation I think like is always, we'll probably come back to this year too, is like, are we at a point where we could also use drips? And if that's a quick no, then that's a quick no. But also to, you know, are we able to leverage the way that the grants work could disperse funds? You know, we could technically have set aside a larger, because I do hear your point about it would be harder to recruit team members if you don't have a proper runway, and I hear that, especially if you're going to, you know, be doing this recruitment over the next few months full force. So you know, we could imagine a situation where you know, if we can have the full amount dispersed to grants, and they can give it you the first chunk for the first, you know, for V1 of the centralized offering, and then there could be some sort of retro and a proper introduction of the new lead, and then you and the new lead can kind of more formally unlock the next tranche of funds. That would at least provide, you know, and then at least at the grants, there's some review of who that person is, and that the funds are going to be used appropriately.
You know, that is definitely an option that we can explore. The problem I continue to have with this, and I don't understand, maybe this is, I don't understand because I haven't gone through that process myself, is that like, so the grants org has an entity today, and then even in that scenario, though, we, the contractors, will have to create an entity, because we will be creating a for-profit service, and I personally wouldn't feel comfortable actually, like, you know, doing this like a non, like, you know.
You would still be an association. I'm not arguing that point.
Yeah, so basically, like, you know, in that scenario, the part that we win, I guess, is that the funds will be allocated to us, you know, like over time. But this is something that we can solve with a smart contract. You could use drips today, like, you know, either through the grants org or even without the grants org. We can do this straight from the DAO, for instance, right? Like the part that I'm more concerned about is more like the fact that, like, I was hoping that, like, you know, when like there were some comments that, hey, like, you know, there's a faster process or a lighter process. I was thinking that people refer to the fact that, like, we won't have to create a new entity. But it seems that, but I don't see any future where we will avoid that.
No. I'm mainly focused on the accountability around funds, and solving for that. And, like, you know, if we can also, there are multiple ways of solving that. But I think if we, you know, as someone voting to disperse these funds, you know, how do we know, you know, to not know exactly who's going to be in charge of these funds maybe in 3 months' time is like I sit uneasy on. So if there are ways to implement,
fix that.
Yeah. And so I'm open. I mean, there are multiple ways to fix that, and I just mentioned two. So like whether or not you set up an association is solving for a different problem.
Yep. Understood. Yeah, that makes sense. So let's actually like maybe on the forum, because I think that's an interesting conversation. And FYI, I had another. I'm sorry.
I and as I mentioned before, I'm happy to
pick
this up on the forum. I just wanted to bring it up here in case, like, it took me a little longer to get it on the forum.
No, and just FYI, I had another contributor that actually reached out to me after the proposal and was like, oh, you know, like, it's interesting. Like, we also, like, you know, been thinking about like, similar problems. So I think sharing that publicly is actually a very interesting process for everyone. And we can compare these two scenarios and like, see what works. There's actually 3, like we can even go straight from the DAO streaming to an entity. So it's actually 3, but great. Let's continue on the forum. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thank you.
I believe Abby had a question next.
Yeah. Hey. Awesome. Thanks everybody for all the questions. I had questions that have been answered already, which is really great. So I just had one more and just wanted to share a couple of thoughts. So first, I think it's awesome, as I wrote on the forum. I think that this is a great idea. I think it makes so much sense to have a hosted service built around Radicle. I think it'll help us bootstrap adoption. It'll make it easier to use. And it's also like a really great potential sustainability path, as we've seen with other storage networks, like decentralized storage networks like Arweave and IPFS and so on. So I think it's definitely something that we should start experimenting with, especially if we feel ready to. As I shared on the forum, I feel like my concerns are mainly about accountability and approach. And so maybe we just talked about accountability, and I think that actually kind of looking into how we could build more accountability into this proposal would be something I'd be interested in doing on the forum. Because, yeah, I mean, I guess my question is like, when we were reviewing the integrations and tooling proposal for grants, I remember that you shared some feedback with Yorgos, which is saying that you would imagine the funding scaling and progressing over time based off of different criteria, such as like Radicle 1.0 being out, having user feedback already collected that could be used to prioritize the integrations, showing how the integration is being prioritized with that feedback, and then having expected impact and usage measured and reported. And so when I'm looking objectively at this proposal as an investment, that's because that's what it is. There's a you could say business, I'm using air quotes, business opportunity for Radworks, for Radicle, in addition to bootstrapping adoption of Radicle and making it easier to use. So if I'm looking at it objectively as an investment, I feel like that there's like a lot of unknowns. There's no team. We don't have a team that would be like, we have a couple leads, but there's nobody who's committed yet, who has the expertise that I think we'd be looking for, who'd be okay to be paid in Rad. So, the open question is like, what if that team can't ship, or who is that team going to be? The next one is that there isn't any market signal yet. What if nobody wants this? I'm sure people are going to want this, but that is still, something that you would be looking for before investing heavily in a product. There's no plan for revenue generated. So what you'll do with the money, I think that it's a for-profit entity that will have a paid service. And so kind of trying to understand like what will happen with this money and what the expectations there are, something that I would probably be expecting looking at this objectively as an investment. And then the last one is like no track record, right? I mean, obviously there's your track record because you're the founder and you've been contributing to this project for a long time. But if we're looking holistically at, I guess, this as a team that is being proposed, it's kind of lacking that. So can you elaborate a little bit on why this work, the incentivized seed nodes, is kind of being considered under different criteria than we laid out and we agreed upon with like the integration and toolings org? Do you see the work having a different having a different scale, a different importance? I think just understanding how you view it differently would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Like a lot of points I think about where to start. So let me start with the conversation about scaling the capital, which was the argument that was used. So just for context, I voted in favor of basically like the grants. The grant allocation. My argument was that if we want to go actually for the scale of capital that was originally requested, then potentially, we could scale it like as Radicle 1.0 is out and a bunch of other things. So I'm absolutely open to do the exact same thing here. I don't have any intention to be or desire to be treated differently. Like I personally just feel that like this is work that I want to see happen. And I want to actually set up that team in the best possible way for this to succeed on that. So that's that's the first thing. With regards to track record, I mean, like like I feel that, like over the years, like a lot of the ideas that, start from scratch, usually they start from an existing contributor that has a track record. I feel that, this is the realistic path. Like, we've done the same thing. Alex and I did the same thing with Radicle, I've done the same thing with Drips, right? So I feel that this is something that, okay, yes, in an ideal world, we could have all known contributors and all of that. But the truth is that building new projects never works like this, right? You need to have a seed, you need to have a new, you need to have a contributor that, is trusted within the ecosystem, and then go from there. So, that's that. With regards to timing, the difference between November and now is that simply because I'm working with a Radicle team, I can tell you that the team is basically ready to ship. At least that's the latest I have as of this morning with Alexi. The team is now doing user research, and we are planning go to market. So I don't have any unknown if we're going to ship Radicle 1.0. We will ship Radicle 1.0 in Q1. At least that's the commitment I have from the team that is working on technology. So then, the questions that are left in relation to the questions we had back then, it's more hey, user, is there demand for this? I feel that, again, I'm using analogies from different ecosystems and what has happened with different ecosystems to say, I feel that I have a high degree of confidence that for the centralized service, there will be a need for that, as long as Radicle is still relevant. And then with regards to prioritizing their user feedback, this is something that as I said, I plan to do this type of work is in the proposal, and share it and again, I feel that it's my track record. We've done this whole thing with Drips recently, in public, so I feel that this speaks more to any promise that I will make somehow. So, that's kind of where I stand with that. I feel that, I don't feel that we need to be treated differently than anything else that's happening on the ecosystem. I'm absolutely okay, to scale capital, but I feel that for me it's I want to see I want to see the community be let's build stuff. Let's not get lost and leave let's not get lost in operational things, because yes, ideally we would have the team today, but we never had the team, right? You need someone to go out and hire that team, and you need a seed to start. So that's kind of why I thought that hey, it would make sense for me to go do this. I've done this multiple times, even in this project, so it would probably make sense to start here. But if anyone else if anyone else would want to contribute to this effort or even lead this effort, I'm absolutely open to that. I have no particular desire to add another workload on me. I feel that it's a very exciting opportunity for the project, and I also think it's a very exciting piece of work that I would love us to.
Oh, did we lose you? You still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Cool. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think it's definitely work that we should be bootstrapping now and starting to get work on. I think it's just now with Radworks, I think the main thing that we're trying to do is also establish better accountability practices, since we operate different than we did in the past. And so I think it's just all about figuring out what can we do to create, better accountability in practice, while also continuing to fund and build, really cool stuff. And so I think that there's plenty of opportunity to do that for this proposal as well. So my follow-up question to that is, I read your comments about, your concerns with funding this via grant. One of those being, well, first, I think the work definitely benefits from a separation of concerns from the existing orgs, 100%. I think that if a hosting service exists, it should be its own association that has, separation from the rest of the ecosystem. And I also see the value of having an entity for building out a larger scale team. I guess I'm looking at this a little bit more what is the current point, which is kind of, idea conception to where we want to be at end of, I think it was Q1, or it was end of Q2, which is launching a centralized seed node. And I'm trying to understand why, like a short-term grant for onboarding one team member or, to a dev team to scope an MVP in more detail and start building on it, couldn't translate into a longer-term oriented either org proposal or scaled capital via the grants org. I saw that because you said that you consider this term long-term oriented. And so do you think that that's not possible? Do you think it wouldn't be possible to allocate a short grant for onboarding, a portion of this team to prove, that there is a team that they can ship, and, kind of demonstrate, the value that's being created, while also funding the work and keeping it along the same timeline? Or do you think that's not possible?
The way, I mean, everything's possible, right? Like we can, of course, we could make it happen. Like the way I think about this is more like, what are the best conditions I can create in order to actually build the best team and, execute the best on that. Like, just to be blunt, like if the concern here is that I'm going to take the money and run, as you all know, I managed the capital behind that project for many years, right? Like, so the incentives are not here for me to actually do that, right? So if the idea for having a bit more, having the capital for the year, right, committed is so I can actually go make the case for someone that hey, look, this is, the organization, this is the grant, we have the capital until the end of the year, right? And then the scenario that if you see in my proposal, I'm clearly saying that, the centralized service, I feel it's fairly trivial. With regards to one engineer, I'm not a fan of one engineer teams. I actually like minimum two for the obvious reasons. I never do that anymore. I feel that it's not it's not the right way to engineer a thing. Bass factor 1 is not great, right? So I would say that yes, minimum 2 engineers we could start, and ship a centralized service. And I'm also saying that if we assess that actually the centralized service is not possible, specifically latency wise, because indeed this is a high risk project. I really don't know if it will check out. I think that it might, and I think it's actually interesting to explore that, but there's a high degree that the centralized service will succeed and the decentralized service will not be possible. Then, in that scenario, we will simply return the capital, right? It's and again, we can engineer a structure where you don't need to trust me if you don't want to trust me. But we can actually have a group of contributors potentially sitting on that association, having the majority control of that capital, and things like that, for instance. But I just want to be pragmatic and say the way I think about it's what are the best conditions here to make that team succeed without actually requiring absurd amounts of money or whatsoever, right? And I try to basically approach everything with that. The same thing with being paid in RAD, right? The same mindset. I was trying to create the conditions of hey, on the one side, okay, let's take the smallest risk we can, and then on the other side, basically let's create the right conditions for us to hire, because great people build great products, right? So and then go from there. Finally, I realized, Abby, I did not answer your point about revenue. Just so I feel that I communicated this previously, both on the forum and on the video. I am not the ideal setup here is that there's an entity that generates revenue, and then of course, ideally, in my world, that revenue goes somehow back to the DAO, right? That is the ideal world here. But of course, this comes with question marks, and this is more legal stuff, right? Is that a good idea or not? Is this something that is within known legal boundaries or not, right? So again, I feel that the simplest solution for that would be to have a group of proven core contributors actually being members of that association, right? Or have it under a non-profit entity, maybe. I don't know. This is where we could get creative, but there's no I don't have any particular desire to actually run run a for-profit project. And again, you can look at my track record, the Public Good Association is a non-profit, right? I cannot generate revenue, as I know So there's no desire for that. I feel that we simply need to get creative about how we can do this the right way.
Cool.
So we're running up on time, so maybe we can just like continue on the forum. Yeah, I think just like my one feedback from after hearing your responses, which I really appreciate, is I think that maybe like an iteration, like and something that we should add to this proposal to at least personally would make me feel more comfortable is just a section about accountability and like kind of, you know, working together on figuring out what accountability we want to build into this proposal to create like a better, you know, best practice for how we can kind of move forward with ideas in this like org stage. And I think that could be related to how the capital is managed or the conditions in which the capital will be returned or what contributors will be also involved in the association from the rest of the ecosystem. I think it's just more about like injecting a little bit more accountability into this. Again, to establish better best practices for how we kind of build stuff moving forward with Radworks Capital. So that would just be kind of my only suggestion that I personally want to see in the proposal. And we can kind of like discuss that async on the forum.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We, as Abby mentioned, we are running up on time. One thing I did want to just say before we close the call is it sounds like, well, first of all, what I'm hearing from this call and also from the feedback on the forum, everybody's pumped about the idea. There's just a few questions and a little bit of uncertainty or open questions around kind of the setup and execution and accountability. We've discussed multiple solutions or different varieties of solutions to all of these questions, open questions or outstanding issues here on this call. And it sounds like there's a lot more to be discussed on the forum. One thing I will say, though, is that it does feel, given that this proposal, if it were to go through the February proposal cycle, the kind of finalized version of that proposal it would need to be up on Monday when it moves into formal review. But I'm basically, or worded in another way, is that all of these things would kind of need to be settled or agreed on or kind of finalized in that version of the proposal, so folks actually know what they're voting for, or have as many details, as much information as possible as they are going to vote. So yeah, I am. Yeah, so just that being said, like there's still a lot of open questions and things to discuss. So I'm not sure, I guess, LA, maybe if you had any thoughts or feelings on that just short timeline, you as the proposal author, like just a quick reaction of like how realistic you think it is in order to get the proposal in a place that it would be transparent enough and clear to the community that they would know what they would be voting on by Monday.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that I can make Monday work just for what it takes. Like, you know, like again, you know, if like I feel that like the gap here that was I even wrote it down in my original proposal is basically like, you know, like figuring out, you know, who will be on the multisig that will receive the funds, right? Like, and you know, who controls that multisig really, and who controls those funds. So that's something that, like, you know, I can, you know, work on tomorrow and on Friday, and or by Friday people like by Monday when we vote, people will know exactly, like, you know, who's in control of those funds if that proposal passes, and then they can vote accordingly.
Yeah, I think honestly an even bigger or overarching question is the kind of structure of it as well. Like, I know you said you don't care if it's an org or a grant, but those are also two very different things that require very different, or a lot of like setup, or yeah, so a different setup process. So that would also be one thing to like clarify too, is like if you are going to stick with an org, like just making that clear, since it's been kind of discussed in different ways, or if you do shift gears, maybe just making that clear as well. Just wanted to point that out too, just so folks, again, so it's very clear what folks are voting on and voting for.
Yep.
Or against.
That sounds good. Yeah. Yep,
Great.
Yep.
Okay, I will call it here, folks. We're already a little bit over time. Thank you everyone for participating on the call today, on the forum. Angie, to your comment or your question earlier, I always share the recording after the call, and I do like timestamps based on the questions or like kind of the sections of discussion. But what I will do tomorrow on the forum is try to summarize some of these new points that we hit on today, or these like bigger discussions. Also, please feel free to like jump on, add your comments and questions as well, just so it's up. But I will try to do this tomorrow morning. I'm gonna have this all on the forum and on YouTube tomorrow morning, so folks have access to it. But yeah, that's kind of just the general process of next steps for moving this proposal forward, or moving the discussion around this proposal forward. And again, if LA feels and kind of it seems we get a general consensus or feeling that that folks are ready to vote on this proposal by Monday, it will then go into formal review with a corresponding snapshot poll, where people can give their show support or contention to the proposal, depending on where it's at and where folks are at. So yeah. Again, thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you, LA, for presenting and for giving such great detail in context to the proposal. Yeah, I will have everything posted by tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
everyone. Have a good week.
Thanks, Ellie.
Bye.
Thanks, LA.